Hello and welcome to the Crafted Closet. I'm Julie, and in today's video I'm going to show you the backpack that I made for my son. He requested the Trailblazer from Bagstock, and I'd made one last year for my daughter, so he wanted that same backpack pattern, but I wanted to make it a little bit more masculine, and for him it didn't need to be convertible. So I'm really just going to show you the changes I made to the pattern. There are a ton of great videos on YouTube about how to make this bag pattern, and I didn't feel like I needed to reinvent the wheel by showing a new version. So I'm going to show you the changes that I made. I didn't put a front handle on or the side strap connectors, and I made the backpack straps look a little more like a traditional backpack and less like purse straps. And then I also used webbing for this back hook. So I'm going to show you how I made these padded straps, and then the strap attachments and webbing straps that go along with these ladder locks. And then as a little bonus, I'm going to throw in how I do this faux piping on the side pockets, just because I like how it looks and I think it's a fun detail. So let's get started.
I started by taking a backpack that I know already fits my son and just tracing the existing backpack straps. After I had everything traced, I added 1/2 inch seam allowance to the top of the strap where it'll attach to the bag. And then I used my hip curve to go along those curves and just smooth them out about 1/8 of an inch away from the line that I drew to allow for the binding, because that binding is going to take up a little bit of space. So I didn't want them to be too wide. The finished straps end up being about 15.5 inches long. They're 2 5/8 wide at the top and about 2 inches at the bottom of the strap. Then I cut out my pattern piece, and once I had it cut out, I also made a pattern piece for the foam. I did that by drawing 3/8 of an inch inside of the pattern piece that I had just created for the straps, because I don't want the foam to be within the area where the binding is, because that's going to add too much bulk. So now I've cut out all my pieces, and I'm clipping together the front strap, back strap, and the foam. I have the front and back wrong sides together with the foam sandwich in between in the center. Now I'm basting the strap together at 1/4 of an inch. That 1/4 of an inch will be inside the binding when this is finished, so you won't see these stitches. It's just to hold everything in place. The fabric I'm sewing with in this project is Cordura Nylon. It's 1000 denier. It's the first time I've sewn with that. You might struggle with this if you had a regular domestic machine, but you could definitely do this type of project with other fabrics on a regular domestic. But this 1000 denier is pretty thick and heavy. It also comes in a 500 denier. I just couldn't find it in all of the colors available. So if you know a place that has all the colors of Cordura Nylon in the 500 denier, I would love to know, because I'd like to get my hands on some of those. So leave that down in the comments if you know where to find it. So now I'm sewing together my bias strips. They are cut at 1 3/4 inches wide. I didn't have a long enough piece to go all the way around the backpack straps, so I'm sewing them together. I sew them together at a 45-degree angle to make it so that it's not quite so bulky where those seams are. And then I just trim off the excess. And when I apply it to the bag, I make sure that that seam is held open. Now I am attaching the bias binding to the front of the strap. I'm sewing at just under 3/8 of an inch. It's about 8.5 millimeters. And I'm just placing the bias binding right at the edge of the backpack strap and sewing along. Once I get down to these curves, or the bottom curve, I'm going to clip that curve just to allow that binding to go around the curve. And I'm definitely not clipping in all the way to where my sewing line is. I'm probably clipping in about 1/4 of an inch. I want to make sure that I'm not going past my sewing line because I don't want it to fray over time. But I do need a little bit of help to get around that really tight curve with the thickness of fabric that I'm using. And then I'm just going really slowly around that corner or curve. Once I get to the end, I'm going to trim off my excess fabric and threads. And then I'm going to fold the bias binding to the back side of the strap. So I fold it in half and then fold the edge into the center. And then I just clip it in place, making sure that the binding is covering my previous stitch line on the back side. And then just clip it in place. Do lots and lots of clips just to hold everything in place nicely. As I go around the curve at the bottom, I use lots and lots of clips just to make sure it's all held in place and that it's covering that stitch line from attaching the binding to the front. Then once I've got it finished clipping, I actually turned the clips so they were all flat side down, and I'm going to sew from the top again. And I'm sewing it 1/8 of an inch over from my previous stitch line. And that's going to make sure that I catch the back as well as give a nice top stitching on the front. And again, around this bottom curve, I'm just going very slowly. I use my fingers a lot as kind of a pivot point, and I'm just making sure it's all laying nice and flat as I go, and also bringing in a stiletto to kind of help make sure that that fabric is laying flat as it goes through the needle. And then, sorry, my hair and glasses are kind of getting in the way. I was trying to get in close enough to see what I was doing, but that also, try to have the camera at a great angle so that you guys can see what's happening too. You kind of get the same view that I'm getting. So occasionally my hair and glasses get in the way, and occasionally I bump it with my head. But now you can see the finished binding on the strap, and it all looks really nice. And now I'm showing what the finished strap is going to look like. We're going to add the webbing and the ladder lock. So I start with my webbing and insert it into the ladder lock, making sure that my ladder lock is facing up, and then pull through, and I leave 2 inches to fold to the back. Now I'm going to sew that to the strap, and I'm lining up the fold of the webbing with the end of the backpack strap. And I'm going to sew in a box with an X in it to secure this webbing to the strap. It's about 3/4 of an inch square. Mine ends up not being quite square, but I was happy enough with it. So I go all the way around making a box. On this last side, I have to backstitch to get that box completed because my presser foot can't handle the height of the ladder lock. And then I'm sewing at an angle from one corner to the other. I'll go back across that bottom of the box and then sew, turn it all around once I figure out how to turn it. And then I'll decided to go one more stitch. Then I'll turn it and go complete the X. And then I'm going to do one last line of stitching across the top of the box just to give me some extra security. I think nope, okay. And then once I have that done, I'm going to pull all of my threads to the back. You can just pull on your bobbin thread and it should pull the top stitching thread to the back. And once I have those all pulled to the back, I'm going to tie a square knot. So right over left, left over right, and pull it tight. And then I'll snip off the excess threads and grab a lighter and melt those. The thread that I'm using for this project is a polyester outdoor thread from Coats & Clark, and it just gives me a nice thick thread to use. Now I'm marking the webbing every 2.5 inches, and I'm going to sew it to the strap at those points to give my son little places that he can clip stuff on. And then this webbing also will go all the way into the seam allowance at the shoulder to give the strap even more sturdiness. So I'm just sewing over the nylon webbing 3 times at each place. The other thing you could do would be to zigzag stitch this into place, but my machine is a straight stitch only. So I'm doing it, just going over it 3 times, and that should give it plenty of strength. And if you hold the threads at the back when you start stitching, it should help keep it from kind of creating a rat's nest on the back. I remember to do it on some of them and not on the others. And now I'm clipping off the excess nylon strap or webbing, and I'm going to melt the end of that too to make sure that it stays nice and secure once it's sewn into the finished backpack. I'm also basting this in place. Now I'm going to pull all of the threads to the back of the strap, and you could knot them off again here. I just clipped them and melted them. And here are the finished straps. Now I'm making my lower strap connectors. I've cut the fabric to 3.5 by 5, and I've cut my nylon webbing to 21 inches. I'm folding the strap connector right sides together, and I'm making sure that the webbing sticks out 2.5 inches from the end of the strap connector. And then I'm going to sew at 1/2 inch. And then backstitch across that webbing to make sure that it stays nice and securely in place. And then I'm going to fold the strap connector so the right sides are facing out and get it all nice and neat and make sure my corners look good. Then I'm going to top stitch 1/8 inch away from the edge along the nylon webbing and stop when I get 1/8 of an inch from the top of it, of the connector. Then I'll sew over about 3/4 of an inch and then pivot and go back down the nylon webbing so that gets that webbing nice and secure in there. And then for looks and actually a little more security, I'm also going to go across the other direction and sew 1/8 of an inch away. And debate here whether or not I want to make a cross stitch or just a nice little square, and I decided to go just square. Go down to the corner, go down about 3/4 of an inch, and then sew back across to the raw edge. And then once I finish that, I grab my ruler and mark a line between the corners and cut off the excess. And I don't show it on camera, but I do singe the edges once I've cut this to make sure it stays nice and secure. Now I'm going to attach my straps and a handle to the exterior top panel. I'm marked the center and I'm marking 3/4 of an inch away on either side. And I have a 10-inch piece of my nylon webbing to make the center loop handle. I'm just looking to make sure I'm happy with that. And then I'm going to base that in place. And then I'm going to put my straps on. You want to make sure that the curve is going away from the neck. And I'm making it so that they just line up right with the edge of that handle. And sorry, I'm kind of in the frame. But I'm basting that in place and back stitching at the beginning and end. And I'm adding the next little piece and sewing it at 3/8 of an inch. Back stitching as I go over the straps just to give them some more security. I lost my video footage of adding the bottom connectors, but I just added them so that the corner lined up with the bottom of the pocket and basted them in place. And the rest of it, I followed the directions in the pattern. Now I'm inserting the webbing into the ladder lock. So you go up through the center and down through the bottom. And once I get that all pulled through and make sure everything's laying nice and straight, I'm going to fold over my webbing 1/2 inch and another 1/2 inch and sew a little box here. If you don't have the capability to do that much thickness, you could just fold it over once. I've got the end singed, so it's not going to come apart anyway, but this helps the nylon webbing not be able to go back through the ladder lock so that it's kind of secured in place. And then finish up that little rectangle, and then everything else I did basically the way that the pattern calls for. And here is the little bonus, how to do the faux piping on the side pockets. So I just line up my 2 pieces together and sew at the 3/8 of an inch seam allowance that the pattern allows for. but instead of folding right at that line and top stitching, I fold the inside so that it's just poking out by about 1/8 of an inch, and then top stitch along that line, and that gives me that pretty little faux piping piece. And then I attach it to the side panel. I start by attaching the bottom, and it's about 1/4 of an inch short, but I'm still catching the bottom of that piece when I sew everything together. Then I pull the side so that it lines up with the edge of the side panel. And baste that in place. And then I go back and do the opposite side. And this way I'm not trying to pin everything in place all at once. I've got the bottom already secured in place, so I think it makes it easier than if I had tried to just go around in one U shape. So get everything nice and lined up, and then baste it in place at about 1/4 of an inch. And there you go. That's the finished side pocket.
Wait. You want to take a picture of me with my back?
I'm recording it. Can you turn around? There you go. All right, turn back around. What do you think?
Good.
Good, you like it?
Uh-huh.